On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Shruthi Murthy. She's the head of engineering at Modern Treasury. We're going to be talking about product and team building at different stages and different phases of the company. Shruthi's been at fantastic companies at different growth stages, and I'm excited for her to kind of share her perspective on engineering management and team building. Shruthi, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Amir. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. All right, let's start off at the top. Let's do two things. One, let's find out what Modern Treasury does. And then, as the head of engineering, what are some of your responsibilities?
So, let me start off with Modern Treasury. Modern Treasury provides payment operations software for companies to move and track money. We have both a web app as well as an API, that provides standardized APIs to talk to banks for businesses to move money over the bank rails. We provide various different payment types, such as ACH, moving money over wire transfers, over checks, etc. We also provide payment adjacent software like ledgers, as well as payment compliance software to provide identity verification and transaction fraud monitoring.
Awesome. And then as the head of engineering, I mean, it's a pretty broad title. I guess, what are you responsible for?
So as head of engineering, I lead and run all of the engineering teams within the company. Most of my work, as an engineering lead, kind of like falls into three pillars, I would like to say. It's around, building the product, working with the product teams to come up with the product strategy and execution methodology, as well as the processes that we need to build around, optimizing for a streamlined product execution strategy. And also on the people management side, the day-to-day people management, as well as, putting together the team building, hiring strategy, and executing on those as well.
Awesome. I mentioned we're going to be talking about, team building, engineering management. Your background's kind of interesting in the sense that you've worked for some really big companies that have grown to become big. And you have a unique perspective seeing these companies grow and mature. I guess kind of to start off at the top, just kind of, work our way back. In terms of Modern Treasury, just give us a sense of, where you guys are at in terms of just size and scope so we have some context.
I would say we're not like a very small company at this point, but we're still small for all practical purposes. We are about 200 people on the team right now. And it's been an interesting ride. We have gone through some really fast growth over here. And on the product side as well, it's been quite a wild ride in the past year or so. On the product side, one of the metrics that we track is the reconciliation volume. This is the amount of money that we reconcile on the payments platform, and that is around 2.7 billion per month.
Oh, I mean, it sounds like things are taking off. And I guess as you're looking to scale there and grow the team, you're going to start looking at some of the past experience you've had in seeing companies within different phases grow. Let's talk about different phases, right? And I think this might be, more art than science. There's no right way. There's probably a billion ways to do it. But when you're kind of looking at a company and you're evaluating the phase that they're in, at this point in your career, you have a lot of tools in your toolbox. Picking the right tool for the right environment, for the right size, that seems to be tricky. I guess maybe walk us through in terms of just when you started at Modern Treasury, kind of how you evaluated the phase that you joined and kind of some of the initial thoughts of, all right, well, I need to build a team. This is kind of the strategy that I need to come to the table with.
That is a great question. I think one of the reasons that I joined Modern Treasury was that I really like working at early stage companies where you kind of start off small and you get to build the team, get to build the product. And, you grow alongside the product and the team. You get to know the people pretty quickly. And, it's easy to build relationships when the team is small. And that, has an immense impact on the kind and quality of the product that we build. So that was one of the reasons why, I started at Modern Treasury at the stage that we started. And one of the important things that I think about when building a team is, whether the product has achieved product market fit or not. Right. So that is a very important, turning point in the phase of product building as well as in the stage of team building as well. before the product market fit is achieved, it's very difficult to, the product is in the incubation or prototyping phase. And it's very difficult to to actually say that you will invest in team building, invest in scaling the product before product market fit. So, it's almost like you're kind of like winging it before that stage. But once the product reaches product market fit is when you kind of decide you have a better, more predictable processes and more of a well-developed strategy around scaling the product as well as scaling the team. So I would suggest that, before product market fit, you keep the team really small. You keep the team really small so that you don't have too much overhead in terms of communication, in terms of management, in terms of all of the other, even collaborative processes that are needed in team building. So you keep all of that overhead small so that you can entirely focus on achieving product market fit by having that single-minded and laser-sharp focused. And after you achieve product market fit is when you kind of come up with the actual team building and product scaling strategies.
Absolutely. I guess when you were looking back at, your time at WhatsApp, for instance, what stage, you were there for 8 years, but what stage did you join in terms of the size of the company at that time?
I think we were about 20 engineers when I joined. And it was an immensely impactful product, right? I think it is one of those products that had the highest number of users to employee ratio was crazy at that time. And I think it continues to be that way. I mean, very, very comparable between the number of users to all of the large, the largest products out there, like YouTube or Instagram, etc. But then the employee size was so small that, the ratio of number of users to employees was one of the largest the industry has ever seen. That was a very interesting ride.
Yeah, I guess when you mention, product market fit and keep teams small, and then you have a situation like WhatsApp where you're saying, you could have a very lean engineering team, but then crazy user adoption. In that case where, work on product market fit, but then you've realized that it's just growing gangbusters. I guess when you're looking at your time at WhatsApp and kind of that philosophy of that market, fit first, how did that work at that time? Because obviously, you mentioned the ratio was kind of incredible. Was it something that you were like, hey, at some point we're going to have to hire rapidly to keep supporting this? Or was it just, what was the phenomenon to be able to keep the engineering to user ratio like that?
I think, we entirely focused the team on building the consumer product, and that was extremely important. We also focused extremely well on the quality and reliability and security of the product. What that meant was our, velocity in terms of building features was not very high. I don't know if you remember, Amir, but this is early 2010s, right? And there were so many messaging apps out there that were building all kinds of crazy features from social features, of course, but also gaming and other, opening up the platform, opening up the app to be more like a platform so that, you can build other apps on top of messaging bots and all of that, right? But if you look back and you'll notice that WhatsApp did not do any of that, right? We entirely focused on end-to-end encryption and, improving the messaging quality and reliability and, voice calling and video calling quality and reliability. And it was a different strategy that WhatsApp took as compared to other messaging products out there. The other messaging products, like I was saying, kind of focused on feature building, right? Whereas WhatsApp focused entirely on the quality and reliability, and that kind of helped in keeping the focus of the team. And, we were extremely popular globally, right? A lot of millions, hundreds of millions of users in Asia, in India, in LATAM, Brazil, Mexico, etc. And we really, really optimized the app to work in poor network conditions on low-end devices. And all of that, came at a cost that is we didn't move that fast on the feature building side, but I think that really, really helped in user adoption and growth and also keeping the team size small.
Interesting. Yeah, you're actually right. I actually was going to comment I know you're not on WhatsApp now, but I think I just noticed WhatsApp update that you could, add memes and stuff like that. Whereas before, I think an emoji was all you had. So even then, it's interesting, as you kind of said, I was just kind of paralleling to, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of apps out there that I was, using, and WhatsApp was like, oh, okay, well, it's super reliable, does this thing great, but it's kind of missing these things. But in the end, that was part of the core of its success. And you kind of, were mentioning the ability to keep the team lean. I guess as you're kind of looking at that and, kind of forward thinking to your next opportunity, you take a job at Modern Treasury, you're entering the company, less than 200 people at the time or whatever. But when you're starting to look at your experience at WhatsApp as a engineering leader, and you're going into Modern Treasury, you obviously have seen that tremendous growth, coming with that right approach of making sure I don't bring too much process, I'm focused on product fit. When you're kind of evaluating, your first 90 days in a job, when you're making that transition from massive scale to, let's say, company that's just on the uptick, what do you start looking for to evaluate in terms of how you want to, work with the team and maybe your plan of what you're hoping to accomplish?
I would say the first 30 days, I think, it's almost like you're kind of like drinking from the fire hose. You're getting to know people. You're getting to know like the infrastructure, at least from an engineering point of view, right? Like you need to get to know the infrastructure that is already in place and the code base to a reasonable level. So it's almost like you're going on a listening tour of the systems at hand and the people that have been there at the company for the first 30 to 60 days. That's kind of what you're doing. And then after which you kind of come up with a strategy for like what you would like to do in the next 6 months to 12 months, right? Like that's kind of like the basic first step that you would want to do. Your question, I think, was about the first 90 days, correct?
Yeah, I guess really the question's about kind of looking at your toolbox. And after you spent those first 30 days, you're on your listening tour, trying to take in what the business is doing. You have a lot of tools at your disposal. Picking the right one or picking the ones you think are the best fit for the product at that time is kind of, I guess, the question of how do you go about evaluating that?
Yeah. So, I have a very simple mechanism for this that is quite easily repeatable. So I think all engineering management, right, like depends on three axes: product, process, and people. And it's very easy to remember because they're kind of like three P's, right? Like product, process, and people. Those are the tools in the toolbox that you would use kind of like align on those three axes. So the questions that I would ask myself is like on the product side, like what are the things that I need to evaluate on the product side, to assess the state of the system? And then, what are some things that I need to put in place on the product side? This could be in terms of like building a roadmap or, coming up with the right level of collaboration with the product teams and the design teams and the engineering teams. And also, coming up with setting metrics. What are the engineering metrics that you want to put in place? Or what are the gaps that you see in the engineering or product metrics? And you go from there on the product side. On the process side, it's more about, what do you want to see within the team that would help the daily, day-to-day execution, as well as, more at a quarterly level, what would you like to see in terms of processes? Do they have the right on-call processes, for example, right? And how good is that on-call process? Does it have good signal-to-noise ratio, for example? Does it involve the right people, the right format of coming up with investigating an incident when it happens, so on and so forth. On the people side, you kind of look at the org. You can decide whether the team is working as it should, and what are some of the team building on the growth side. Like what would you like to see? Because you need to have the right team structure for not like tomorrow or day after, but you kind of need to have a team structure that is more forward looking, so that it will work not just for tomorrow or day after, but like 3, 6, 9 months down the line. At the same time, you want to also be a little flexible and make sure that the team structure is nimble enough and agile enough to be able to take on any changes of priority, any changes of product strategy, things like that. Keeping those three axes, product, process, people, in mind, and building your tools and methodologies around those three axes, and constantly evaluating against those three axes has been extremely useful to me at different points in the past few years.
Absolutely. How are you, I guess, changing in terms of like when you're looking for growth? Is your philosophy around what metrics that you should be evaluating at different phases change? How do you adjust that?
Yeah, so, I think the framework that I have in mind there is to, understand if the product is in the 0 to 1 phase. I think, 0 to 1 is more like before product market fit. I know we've been talking a bit about product market fit, so I'll stick to the same terminology. So, a product can be in the 0 to 1 phase where it is pre product market fit, or it can be in the 1 to 10 phase where the product has product market fit, but you're kind of like still figuring out the needs of the initial few customers, and you're also figuring out your like the way that you want to scale. Or the third phase is like 10 to 100, right? That is, you have kind of great product market fit. You have like 100 customers or so that, that are extremely happy and want to expand into the product. And then you are in that 10 to 100 phase where you're really, really scaling the product, in both from a product point of view, but also from an infrastructure point of view. You're kind of like running into scalability problems, challenges, and so on and so forth. These are all like great problems to have, right? And your traffic is going through the roof, things like that. And you're also building the team. So, that's kind of like the three phases that I think it's good to, evaluate where the product is at any point of time. And then the engineering metrics and product metrics kind of like flow from that understanding.
I think actually that's actually, yeah, I think great points. I think, as you've been kind of talking and we've been talking about that product market fit, I can only imagine, when your time at WhatsApp or even now at Modern Treasury, I can imagine that you have this breadth of, experience seeing a company scale, and you have a very good idea of what you're trying to see in kind of the frameworks you mentioned so that you can make that change. And that's why I always think this is a lot more art than science, because, everyone has a different background, everyone has different, experience, and the tool sets are different. And it's amazing how everyone's looking at the same things, but how you're interpreting is a little bit different. I think it's really interesting to kind of hear you talk about it.
It is super interesting. But I think it's also important to like not get stuck in this analysis paralysis situation. I think it is very important to make decisions and make progress to unblock the team. I think like Bezos and Amazon have this like a great theory about, not walking through one-way doors, evaluating whether you're what is the cost of walking back through that door. That way, that even though you might be making a decision without enough data or without checking off all the boxes. Because many times when you're working at a startup, it's not like you're in the industry, you're in the startup because you want to disrupt stuff, right? And what that means is you don't have all the data because you're kind of like moving through uncharted waters, and you don't have all the data in front of you to like actually make and have the surety that you are making the perfect decision, right? And many times in startups, there's no such thing, or even at large companies for that matter, there is no such thing as a perfect decision. But as long as you know that, you're not walking through a one-way door, or the cost of like walking back is not extremely high, I think, making the decision and building stuff is more important than, making the perfect decision.
Absolutely. I think that's great insight. I definitely appreciate it. I know we're coming to the end of our time together. I was going to ask you, if you could ask a future leader, a future guest, a topic, or have them speak to a particular question, is there anything you'd like to hear about?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the questions that you have been asking have been super interesting. I think one of the questions that I would like to ask a future leader, especially, on the enterprise SaaS product side, is the collaboration between product and sales, right? Like, how do you envision or plan or strategize for that? I think it's been kind of like top of mind for me.
That's a very good one. And then what's a good way of getting hold of you if somebody wants to kind of just talk to you about anything you mentioned on the podcast? Is LinkedIn, email, social? What's a good way?
LinkedIn works, or you can also reach out at Shruthi at Modern Treasury.
Okay, awesome. We'll include those in the show notes. Shruthi, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Amar. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, two things. One, if you can speak to the topic Shruthi mentioned and the collaboration between product and sales and how you plan for and strategize that, I think that'd be great to have you on. Reach out to me, let me know. Also, if you've enjoyed the podcast, if you found it useful, please share it with somebody else. Please put a review up there on your favorite podcast listening app. That's how the podcast grows, and I appreciate that. That's it for this episode. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.